The morning fog drapes over the Maine coastline like a thick blanket, muffling the sound of waves breaking against the rocky shore. The harbor stirs to life as lobster boats idle their engines, waiting for the signal to head out. For the men and women of Maine's lobster fleet, today is another step in a relentless routine that sustains their families and defines their communities. But this season, the stakes are especially high. Over the course of days, nearly 1,000 tons of Maine lobster will be hauled from these cold Atlantic waters and shipped south to Florida, where the hunger for this prized delicacy never seems to end. The numbers are staggering, the scale almost unimaginable. But for the fishermen who live this reality, it is simply work. Hard, grueling, dangerous work. On deck, the crew moves with urgency. Heavy traps are stacked neatly in rows, ropes coiled and ready, bait packed into mesh bags that will lure lobsters from the rocky seafloor. The smell of herring clings to everything, mixing with diesel fumes and salt spray in the crisp morning air. Faces are tired, etched with lines from years of long days at sea, yet every movement is practiced and efficient. These are people who know the ocean intimately, who can read its moods and anticipate its shifts. Their survival depends on it. They pull on thick rubber gloves, bright yellow slickers, and heavy boots, preparing themselves for hours of labor that will test their endurance as much as their strength. As the boats push away from the docks, the horizon opens into the vast expanse of the Atlantic. The sun begins to climb, scattering streaks of orange and gold across the water. It looks serene, almost peaceful, but the fishermen know better. The Atlantic is never truly tame. Storms can rise without warning, swells can swallow smaller boats, and icy winds can cut to the bone. Yet these crews venture out anyway, driven by the knowledge that every trap they haul could hold a fortune. Maine lobster is not just food, it is wealth, culture, and tradition, woven deeply into the fabric of New England life. The first traps are pulled from the depths with a groan of winches and the sharp crack of wet rope. Water cascades off the wooden and wire cages as they break the surface, glistening in the light. Inside, dark-shelled lobsters thrash wildly, their claws snapping with surprising force. The crew moves quickly, securing each one, measuring it carefully with metal gauges. Those too small are tossed back into the sea, tails flicking as they vanish into the depths. The oversized breeders, the egg-bearing females, are spared as well, marked with a notch to signal future protection. Only the legal catch is kept, a strict adherence to rules that ensures the population remains abundant for the years ahead. The lobsters that pass inspection are placed into crates, their claws bound tightly with rubber bands to prevent injury to the crew and to each other. Each crate fills rapidly, the weight of the harvest growing heavier with every pull. The deck becomes a blur of motion, traps rising, lobsters sorted, bait refreshed, and cages reset into the sea. The rhythm is endless, punishing in its repetition, yet necessary. To reach the incredible goal of 1,000 tons, there is no room for wasted time. The men and women on deck understand this with bone-deep clarity. Every hour counts, every trap matters, every lobster adds to the mountain that will soon travel hundreds of miles to the waiting markets of Florida. Below deck, the scene is no less intense. Storage holds are chilled and ready, rows of crates stacked neatly, seawater spraying over them to keep the lobsters alive and fresh. The clicking of claws echoes in the darkness, a constant reminder of the living wealth that fills the ship's belly. Workers move through the cramped spaces with efficiency, organizing, icing, and preparing for the inevitable flood of product that will arrive in Florida's booming seafood markets. The logistics are daunting, transport trucks, flights, and cold storage warehouses all working in unison. But the system is well-oiled, perfected over decades of demand that shows no signs of slowing. On deck, sweat mixes with seawater as the day wears on. The sun climbs higher, the work intensifies, and fatigue begins to gnaw at the crew. Yet their pace never falters. They work with the understanding that the global appetite for Maine lobster is insatiable, and Florida stands as one of the largest consumers. The Sunshine State's luxury restaurants, bustling resorts, and international shipping hubs create an endless demand that Maine alone struggles to satisfy. It is a strange paradox. boats filled to the brim, 1,000 tons of lobsters pulled from the ocean, yet still not enough to quench the hunger of the markets. As the boats prepare to return to port, the scale of the harvest becomes evident. Crates line the decks, stacked high, dripping with seawater, each one worth hundreds of dollars. Multiply that by the thousands carried on board, and the figures climb into the millions. But the numbers tell only part of the story. What cannot be measured is the exhaustion etched on the crew's faces, the rawness of their hands, the ache in their backs. The true cost of this wealth is not just in dollars, but in human endurance, in the willingness to fight against an unforgiving sea to deliver a product that the world craves. Back at the harbor, trucks wait with their refrigeration units humming, ready to carry the lobsters south. Florida's markets are already anticipating the arrival, menus printed, reservations made, customers eager. The journey from trap to table is long and complex, yet it begins here, with men and women braving the Atlantic to haul unimaginable quantities of shellfish from the depths. The lobsters will soon be on planes, highways, and ships, scattered across hundreds of destinations, but their origin remains the same, the rocky coast of Maine, where tradition and survival are bound together in every trap hauled from the sea. The second phase of the journey begins not on the ocean, but on the docks, where the scale of the harvest comes fully into view. The boats, heavy and low in the water from the weight of their catch, unload crate after crate of Maine lobster. Workers move with mechanical efficiency, forming human chains that pass the dripping containers from deck to dock, stacking them in towering rows. The air is alive with the scent of brine, diesel fumes, and the faint metallic tang of seawater. Seagulls swarm overhead, their cries echoing across the harbor, drawn to the scraps that fall between the crates. On the ground, forklifts buzz back and forth, loading the lobsters into refrigerated trucks that will begin the long journey south. Each crate, worth thousands of dollars, is treated with the kind of care one might expect for fragile cargo, because in many ways it is. The lobsters must arrive alive, fresh, and ready for the tables of Florida's bustling seafood markets. Inside the trucks, the conditions are meticulously controlled. Cold air circulates continuously, and water sprays keep the lobsters damp and oxygenated. Drivers know the value of what they carry, and every hour of the journey is calculated down to the mile. The logistics companies that handle this trade have perfected the art of moving perishable wealth across vast distances. Some of the shipments go directly by road, while others are loaded onto planes, flown out of Boston or New York to land in Miami and Orlando within hours. The scale is almost unbelievable. 1,000 tons of lobster traveling south, a convoy of trucks and flights worth millions of dollars in motion at once. The road between Maine and Florida is long, but the appetite at the other end demands speed, and the supply chain responds with ruthless efficiency. Meanwhile, in Florida, anticipation builds. The Sunshine State is one of the largest consumers of Maine lobster, and for good reason. Its sprawling tourism industry thrives on luxury dining experiences, where lobster tails are centerpieces of menus in resorts, cruise ships, and high-end restaurants. Chefs in Miami, Key West, and Tampa Bay wait eagerly for the shipments, knowing that the arrival of fresh lobster means lines of customers willing to pay a premium. In some places, crates are open just hours after leaving Maine, the lobsters banded and still alive, ready to be boiled, grilled, or baked for an audience that rarely considers the brutal work required to deliver them. To most diners, lobster is simply a delicacy, not the product of endless hours of labor and thousands of miles of transport. Back in Maine, the fishermen recover briefly, but there is little time to rest. The demand is insatiable, and the sea offers only short windows of opportunity. Crews repair traps, mend ropes, and prepare bait for the next outing, knowing that the cycle never truly ends. Some reflect on the strange paradox of their work. Even after hauling 1,000 tons in just a few days, it is still not enough. Florida alone consumes staggering amounts, and beyond it lie other states and international buyers. The fishermen understand that their catch, though massive, barely scratches the surface of the global appetite. The work continues not because they want to, but because they must. This is their livelihood, their heritage, their survival. The money, of course, is significant. Each crate of lobster represents thousands of dollars, and when multiplied across the hundreds of crates shipped daily, the figures climb into the millions. Yet the wealth does not linger in the hands of the fishermen. Much of it flows outward to shipping companies, distributors, restaurants, and global markets. For the men and women who labor on the boats, what remains is enough to sustain their families and keep their communities alive. Coastal Maine towns depend on this cycle, their economies tied directly to the rise and fall of lobster harvests. Grocery stores, schools, and local businesses thrive when the catch is good and suffer when the sea is less generous. The stakes are personal, immediate, and always uncertain. The route from Maine to Florida is more than a line on a map. It is a lifeline that binds two very different worlds together. At one end are the fishermen, braving cold seas and relentless labor to wrestle lobsters from the Atlantic floor. At the other are the diners, tourists, and chefs, basking in the warmth of Florida sunshine, indulging in lobster feasts without ever touching the salt, sweat, or blood that made it possible. The contrast is striking, almost surreal, yet it is this very imbalance that sustains the industry. Luxury at one end, hardship at the other, both connected by crates of lobster moving quietly down highways and through airports. As the shipments reach Florida, the impact becomes visible. At bustling seafood markets, crates are opened and lobsters spill onto tables, their claws twitching in the humid air. Buyers haggle over prices, chefs inspect the quality, and restaurant owners rush to secure their supply before competitors do. In high-rise kitchens overlooking Miami Beach, lobsters from Maine are plated with precision, their tails split and garnished for wealthy tourists who pay top dollar for a taste of the Atlantic. In Key West, cruise ship passengers line up for buffets where lobster tails are served by the hundreds, consumed in minutes by people who may never know the distance these creatures traveled. The journey from trap to table is complete, yet invisible to those who savor the final product. Back north, the fishermen prepare for another day. Their bodies sore, but their will unbroken. They know that tomorrow new traps will be set, more crates will be filled, and more shipments will roll out of Maine toward Florida. 1,000 tons sounds like an impossible number, yet here it is, divided into crates, loaded into trucks, and consumed almost as quickly as it is caught. And still, the demand grows, pushing the cycle forward, ensuring that the story of Maine lobster is one of both abundance and insatiable hunger. The third stage of this story unfolds as the lobsters leave the docks of Maine and enter the heart of one of the most complex supply chains in the world. Each crate is tagged, documented, and tracked with precision. Temperature monitors are placed alongside the cargo, ensuring that every lobster remains alive and fresh as it travels. The logistics teams move with the same urgency as the fishermen, because even the slightest delay can mean thousands of dollars lost. Cold storage warehouses hum like giant machines, holding mountains of crates only long enough to reorganize them for trucks and planes. The scene is one of controlled chaos, forklifts zigzagging between pallets, conveyor belts rattling, and workers in insulated jackets moving swiftly through aisles lined with seafood destined for faraway markets. The 1,000 tons of Maine lobster begin to scatter into dozens of different paths, but a massive share heads straight toward Florida, where demand devours supply faster than Maine can deliver it. The journey south is relentless. Refrigerated trucks roll out of Maine in convoys, engines rumbling as they begin the 1,000-mile trek toward the Sunshine State. Inside, the lobsters are stacked in tight rows, water misting over their shells to keep them alive, the cold air biting at every corner of the container. Drivers, seasoned veterans of this trade, know that their cargo is as precious as it is perishable. They push through long hours on the highways, eyes fixed on the road, radios tuned to updates on traffic, weather, and delivery schedules. At rest stops, engines never turn off, refrigeration never ceases, because one moment of negligence could transform a fortune into worthless waste. The lobsters are alive, and so the trucks must act like moving aquariums, a delicate balance between speed and survival. Air transport carries another portion of the catch. At airports, crates are wheeled quickly through cargo terminals, scanned and loaded into the belly of jets bound for Miami and Orlando. The sight is striking. Pallets of live lobsters stacked high, surrounded by the buzz of international air freight. Security checks, customs paperwork, and airline handlers all play their part in a clockwork system designed to move seafood thousands of miles overnight. When the planes land, the lobsters are offloaded with the same urgency, rushed into refrigerated trucks that fan out across Florida. The distance from the cold Atlantic waters of Maine to the warm tropical shores of Florida collapses into less than a day, a testament to human ingenuity and an appetite that refuses to wait. In Florida, the arrival of Maine lobster sparks an economic ripple that spreads through multiple industries at once. Seafood markets erupt with activity as shipments are unpacked. Buyers crowd around crates, inspecting the size, the color, the firmness of the shells. Negotiations fly back and forth, prices rise with every hand raised, and within hours, the lobsters are distributed across the state. In Miami's Little Havana, street markets display live lobsters in tanks, drawing curious crowds. In Orlando, luxury resorts advertise lobster feasts, promising guests an indulgence that traveled thousands of miles to reach their plates. Along the coast in Key West, where cruise ships dock daily, restaurants boast of serving fresh Maine lobster flown in straight from the northern Atlantic. For tourists, it is an exotic experience. For Floridians, it is a seasonal bounty. For the fishermen of Maine, it is the reward of their labor, now far removed from the cold waters where it began. The numbers grow surreal when broken down. 1,000 tons of lobster means millions of individual creatures, each one caught, measured, banded, crated, and transported with meticulous care. Each crate, worth thousands, passes through countless hands, fishermen, dock workers, truckers, air handlers, chefs, before it lands on a plate. The value is measured in dollars, yes, but also in effort, in hours of labor and sleepless nights. Florida consumes staggering quantities, and yet even this ocean of lobster is not enough. Restaurants place orders weeks in advance. Distributors scramble to secure inventory, and still, shortages appear. The paradox deepens. The more Maine delivers, the more Florida demands. The cycle is endless, a hunger that cannot be satisfied, fueled by wealth, tourism, and the global allure of this delicacy. Behind the scenes, technology plays a silent but critical role. Sensors track the temperature of shipments in real time, alerting handlers if conditions drift from the narrow window lobsters require. GPS systems trace the movement of every truck and plane, ensuring accountability. Specialized packing materials absorb shocks, preventing damage during transit. Every link in the chain is reinforced by decades of refinement, each innovation designed to bring lobsters farther, faster, and fresher. This infrastructure is invisible to the consumer, but vital to the industry, transforming what could be an impossible task into an everyday reality. Without it, the 1,000 tons harvested in Maine would rot before they reached the first dinner plate. As Florida's markets flood with lobster, the wealth generated flows outward in waves. Distributors see record profits, restaurants draw record crowds, and tourism thrives on the promise of indulgence. For Maine fishermen, the sight of their catch being sold at premium prices in the South is both a source of pride and frustration. They know the product is theirs, the result of their toil, yet much of the profit is absorbed along the chain. Still, the demand secures their livelihoods, ensuring another season, another year of survival on the cold Atlantic. Without Florida, without this voracious appetite, the fishermen's work would be worth far less. With Florida, their labor becomes part of a machine that turns lobster into gold. The story of Maine lobster is thus one of contrasts. Cold northern waters against warm southern shores, grueling labor against luxury dining, small coastal towns against glittering resorts. Each crate bridges these opposites, carrying within it not just a crustacean, but a story of endurance, tradition, and commerce. For those who dine on lobster in Florida, the experience ends with a meal. For those who catch it in Maine, the experience never ends, because the traps must always be reset, the boats must always be loaded, and the journey must always continue. The harvest is not a single event, but a constant cycle, one that links two distant worlds with every ton that leaves the harbor. The final stretch of the journey begins as the massive shipments of lobster settle into Florida's bustling economy, creating scenes that border on the surreal. Crates are unpacked in cavernous distribution centers, forklifts darting between aisles as workers rush to meet the insatiable demand. The lobsters, alive and restless, clatter inside their containers, claws bound tightly yet still twitching. Trucks fan out across the state, delivering to high-end restaurants in Miami, sprawling resorts in Orlando, and seaside eateries in Key West. Everywhere, chefs sharpen knives and heat boiling pots, preparing to transform these creatures into dishes that sell for small fortunes. To the casual diner, it feels like abundance. To the fishermen back in Maine, it feels like the echo of their labor, spread thin across 1,000 tables in a state that can never seem to get enough. The paradox is striking. 1,000 tons of lobster hauled from the frigid Atlantic, carried by truck and by plane for more than 1,000 miles, and yet within days, much of it is gone. Tourists order lobster tails by the hundreds, cruise ships serve endless buffets, and luxury restaurants plate them with champagne and caviar. In Florida, Maine lobster is more than seafood. It is spectacle, a symbol of indulgence. But for the men and women who pulled these animals from the ocean floor, the spectacle is distant. They know the truth. Behind every lobster tail rests hours of backbreaking work, sleepless nights, aching muscles, and an endless battle with a sea that offers no guarantees. The money may circulate quickly, but the sacrifice lingers longer than the taste of any meal. Back in Maine, the fishermen are already preparing for the next round. Their boats, still scarred from the recent harvest, are cleaned and repaired. Traps are mended, ropes replaced, and bait barrels refilled. Families gather at the docks, watching as the crews prepare to return to sea once again. They know the cycle never stops. Florida will call for more, and the world beyond Florida will demand even further. Europe, Asia, and South America have all developed appetites for Maine lobster, but it is Florida that remains the constant, the endless consumer that drives this trade forward. And so the fishermen of Maine, tethered to both the Atlantic and the southern markets, continue to risk everything, season after season, for a product that vanishes as quickly as it arrives. The truth of this story lies not only in the staggering numbers, but in the human cost. 1,000 tons may sound impressive, but it is more than just weight. It is the lives of communities, the sweat of countless individuals, the backbone of an entire region's economy. Every lobster pulled from the sea carries with it a piece of Maine's heritage, a legacy of survival etched into the culture of its coastal towns. For Florida, the lobster is luxury. For Maine, it is life itself. The bridge between those worlds is built on the resilience of people who endure hardships most will never see, so that others can sit in air-conditioned dining rooms and enjoy a taste of the Atlantic without a second thought. As you hear this story, imagine the scale of what has been described. Millions of lobsters, countless crates, highways filled with refrigerated trucks, airplanes loaded with live cargo, chefs preparing feasts for tourists who never think of the journey behind their plate. It is a chain of labor and logistics, of tradition and innovation, of exhaustion and triumph. It is also fragile. Without support, without awareness, industries like this could fade, taking with them not just jobs, but entire ways of life. The fishermen of Maine do not ask for recognition, but they deserve it. And through stories like this, they can be seen, their struggles remembered, and their contributions valued. This is where you come in. By subscribing to this channel, you are not simply clicking a button. You are becoming part of a mission to keep these stories alive. Every subscription is fuel for the next journey, the next documentary, the next opportunity to shine a light on the unseen realities of people who live and work at the edge of survival. Without your support, these voices risk being drowned out by the noise of the world. With your support, they become louder, stronger, and impossible to ignore. Your subscription helps ensure that the story of Maine lobster is not just a statistic in a market report, but a living, breathing narrative of endurance, sacrifice, and tradition. It allows us to continue documenting the raw, unfiltered truth of life at sea and to bring you closer to the human faces behind every catch. When you subscribe, you make it possible for us to go deeper, to travel farther, and to reveal more than just the surface of these industries. You make it possible to honor the men and women who give everything to keep food on the tables of people they will never meet. So if this story has moved you, if you have felt the weight of the traps, the cold of the Atlantic, the exhaustion of the fishermen, and the surreal abundance of lobster flooding Florida, then take action. Subscribe now. Join us in keeping these stories alive. The sea will continue to test those who depend on it, and we will continue to bring their journeys to you. Together, we can ensure that their voices are heard, their sacrifices remembered, and their stories never forgotten.